Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Well, it is Sunday today at the time of this show airing live, and you're listening to the Tamar, Yonah Show here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. As Israel's government cabinet meets on Sunday today, a full lockdown is expected to be placed on the citizens of Israel starting sometime this week as we usher in the Rosh Hashanah holiday and the high holiday season, which includes the Yom Kippur and Sukkot holidays. No final word yet, though, on whether the decision will be made at the time of the airing of the show on Sunday afternoon. According to Arutz 7 News, Israeli hospital directors say there's no need for a full closure. Some directors invited to the cabinet meeting say a full closure is unnecessary. And Health Minister Yuli Edelstein threatens to withdraw his proposal. Also on Sunday today, Housing and Construction Minister Yaakov Litzman resigned, saying that he resigned in protest of the lockdown over the high holidays. But we don't know yet what the final decision is of the cabinet, and we're not going to dwell on that. We will let the chips fall where they may, what the government decides. We have vehement reactions against a lockdown. In the beginning, when they did the first lockdown and we didn't know a lot about it, I have to admit, I was paranoid about what was happening. We didn't know, and the best thing was to kill this at its onset and to make sure that our hospitals were not overwhelmed. That's what it looks like is happening now, that the hospitals are going to be overwhelmed, and that's why they want to make another lockdown. So should we do it? Shouldn't we? I don't know. I think I'm against it. In any case, today we're not going to concentrate on that. We're going to be exploring what would happen if after the November 3rd elections in the United States of America and the results are in, no one concedes. What would happen? Because if no one concedes because they say the other side was cheating, what would happen? We'll be right back.
G'day, I'm Jono Vandor.
And I'm Ross Nichols.
Join us on our program, Israel on My Mind, a show that broadcasts all the weekly goodness that flows like milk and honey from the Holy Land straight into your ears with humorous and happy news stories.
New shows are posted every Thursday at 7 p.m. Israel time, highlighting the lighter side and advancing a positive view of Israel here on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to the Tamar Yonah Show here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. And today we're going to be concentrating on what would happen if after November 3rd and the U.S. election results are in, no one concedes because both sides accuse the other side of cheating. Now, if you've been paying attention to the news, you already know that the Democratic Party already has hundreds of lawyers lined up ready to contest any election results that would say that Biden lost. And U.S. President Donald Trump is saying that he does not trust the mail-in ballots that are going to be coming in. He says that they're probably going to be rigged. Some people are predicting that U.S. President Donald Trump will have a landslide victory. However, a week or two later, after all of the mail-in ballots, etc., are counted, all of a sudden the election results are going to swing and it's going to say that Biden wins. What would happen if Donald Trump and the Republican Party say we're not leaving? We're not leaving the presidency, the White House. We're not leaving the government that we have established here. Because they say that these ballots were rigged. And what happens if the Democrats lose and they say Trump cheated? Trump is always cheating. He's a liar. Not my president, not my president. And they refuse to recognize the federal government because Trump is in power and not Biden. What would happen if then some states decided that since they don't recognize Donald Trump as the winner and as the president, not my president, they decide that they're going to stop paying taxes to the federal government. Now, all of this is conjecture. I'm just imagining a situation, taking it to an extreme because it's still a possibility. And we've seen things in history happen where minorities, minority parties, smaller parties, but vicious ones have taken power by force, by intimidation, by not accepting the rule of law, et cetera, et cetera. We saw that in Germany with the time of Hitler, where how he took his power, et cetera. But what would happen if indeed something like this happened? We already saw in cities like and states like Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, where there was total chaos in parts of the cities there. And the president of the United States, Donald Trump, wanted to assist these governors and mayors and bring in federal forces to protect the federal buildings there, etc. And these mayors and these governors said, you're not welcome. Federal troops are not welcome here. We're going to take care of this. So they're already rejecting the federal government, even though it was against federal property. And they weren't protecting it enough. They were trying to set these federal buildings on fire. One of these places had people inside at the time they were trying to set this place on fire. So this is a very, very fragile and I'm trying to figure out the word, like a powder keg. Very dangerous situation that could happen if you have a contesting of the election results and neither side wants to concede because both are accusing the other side of cheating. So what would happen in a scenario like that? Because if indeed Trump wins and the Democrats don't accept the results of the elections, and if indeed it came to a point where states would stop paying federal taxes because they don't recognize this federal government, it would in essence mean that these states are seceding from the nation. And as we've seen roadblocks in places like the Chaz, the autonomous zones that they had, you had to go through roadblocks. I could see California, Oregon, Washington putting up roadblocks on their state borders and checking everybody who comes in, everybody who comes out, seeing if they're going to allow these people to go through. Maybe they want to close it off to protest and people have to get through the state lines. And then we have more violence. We've seen what happens. We've seen what happened in Portland, Oregon, and Seattle when people wanted to go through where the mobs were. They had to get home. They had to get to work. They had to get to their businesses, whatever it was. And they were attacked. Frightening things happened. What would happen here? And for the Jews in America, some of them now waking up and saying, we need to move. We need to leave. Some of them wanting to come home to Israel, trying to get a passport. That's with the federal government. What if you're living in California and you go to sleep one night living in the United States of America, California, United States of America, and you wake up the next day living in California, autonomous zone, and no longer part of the United States? What would happen in these drastic scenarios? Now, I know I'm taking this again to an extreme, but we're going to focus mostly on what would happen if there was no side conceding a loss. And we heard Hillary Clinton say to Joe Biden, whatever you do, do not concede. And she said she conceded too quickly, and she's telling Biden not to concede. So, with us today, our guest is David Jaffa. He has 35 years of hands-on constitutional and administrative law experience in the United States. Through his dealings with both federal and state governments, he has a grip on understanding the intricacies of constitutional and administrative law, including election law, and we'll be looking at what would happen if there was a contested election where a candidate would not concede their loss in an election. You can find David Jaffa's firm website on ljjlaw.com. That's for 11 Jacobson and Jaffa. Welcome to the show, David Jaffa.
Thank you very much, Tamar. I appreciate it.
All right. Go ahead. Take it from there.
Well, it's a few things are important to understand. You admitted it's an extreme scenario you paint, and frankly, I don't know if any of us knows exactly what would happen in the extreme situation if. I think the more extreme situation would be if Mr. Trump would say, "I don't concede the election, and I'm not leaving," because as of January 20, 2021. His authority as president elected in 2016 ends as a matter of law. So the first question is, if we're talking about abiding the law per se, what happens if someone decides not to abide the law? I think that's a scenario I don't know if any of us can predict what would happen. We saw in 2000, in the 2000 election, Gore and Bush, what happened. Your point, and there, Mr. Gore contested the Florida election.
That was with the Chads.
With the Chads. Mm-hmm. So, as a little background, if you'll allow me, I think it's important that we understand what a presidential election is in the United States. And basically, Americans cast the ballot for a presidential candidate. Their votes, however, actually go towards selecting members of what is called the Electoral College, whom each state appoints based on the popular returns. Okay? So those of your listeners who are American citizens who are expecting an absentee ballot, let us say, wherever they are, whether it's in the United States or Saudi Arabia or anywhere outside the United States. I mean, if they're in Israel, okay? So when you vote for the candidate of your choice in your state, okay? In my case, that would be Colorado. I think in your case, Tamar, that would be California, right? Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? So that means if I choose Donald Trump or Joe Biden and the popular vote in my state is for Joe Biden, then all the electors of Colorado, that's 9 of them, have to choose Joe Biden, okay? They're bound by that. And the U.S. Supreme Court this last summer heard 2 cases like that out of the 2016 election when there were electors, one from Washington State, one set from Washington State, one set from Colorado, actually, who did not abide the popular vote. They wanted to vote for someone other. In the case of Colorado, Colorado voted for Hillary Clinton, but these electors wanted to vote for Mr. Kasich from Michigan. The U.S. Supreme Court said you can't do that. The state of Colorado and the state of Washington and all states mandate that the electors have to choose the person who the state voted for, what the total popular vote is for that state. All right, so it's very important to understand for the president what that means. Obviously, other candidates, it's a different thing. So
okay, you know
if
what,
Mr. Ball,
David, just hold it right there because any second the music is going to come on and we're going to be going to a break. And we'll be back after the break. But I want to say that if anybody has any comments or questions about a scenario like this, what would happen if neither side conceded, feel free to call in. We are live if you're listening on Sunday between 4 to 5 p.m. Holy Time right here in the land of Israel, or if it's between 9 to 10 a.m. Sunday morning, U.S. Eastern Time. We are live. You can join us in the chat room. We'll be right back. Our numbers are on the top of our homepage at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
Hi everyone, this is Andrea Simento from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simento, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Did you know this psalm and many others were composed by a Jewish shepherd and musician who later became a king? Would you like to know some of the inner meanings of psalms to help you connect with God and strengthen your soul? An exciting and easy-to-read book is now available which will help you do just that. Software for the Soul, Psalms for Everyone, available on Kindle, Audible, and Amazon.com. Software for the Soul.
Modesty at the beach? It isn't just about body image, it's about feeling good. Modest swimsuits, so we don't get burned by the sun.
So we won't get ogled by strangers.
So we'll feel free to express ourselves without the need to expose ourselves.
Let Marcy Modest help you to cover up what you want, how you want.
Made in Israel.
Visit marcymodest.com. That's MARSEA modest.com.
And get a 10% discount on your first purchase.
All right, we're back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and what we're talking about today is what would happen if after the November 3rd election in the United States of America, the results were announced and neither side concedes because they both accuse each other of cheating. And do we have a caller? Let's go to Antonio from Washington, the settlement of Washington. Hi, Antonio. What's your comment or question for us?
According to what I heard, if that neither one concede, the Speaker of the House will become president, God forbid. But another alternative is when, I think it was FDR, he was going to serve 3 terms because of war, but he died. And since we are at war, and civil war and all that, a possibility that Trump could become president.
Well, but there's no established civil war, Antonio. By the way, are you calling from Washington State or Washington, D.C.?
Washington, D.C.
Okay. All right. So do you want to answer his question, David? And thanks for your call, Antonio.
Yes.
Interesting.
Thanks, Antonio.
And listen, okay?
Thank you.
Yeah. So one of the difficulties with that scenario of the Speaker of the House becoming the president, that assumes that we know who the Speaker of the House is. Remember, there are 535 House races, or 435 House races that will be in play in this year's election. And although we assume that the current Speaker will be reelected, we don't know that, nor do we know that she would be reelected to the next House. Now, before we get that point, you are correct in terms of the devolution of power as set forth in the Constitution. You are correct. But before we get there, keep in mind that the returns and results that are announced through the press, the night of the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th of November, whenever it might be, those are not official. The official returns only happen once each secretary of the 50 states certifies the ballots in their state And then that is the official count. Once we know that. So as I understood what Hillary Clinton was saying, first of all, a concession by a candidate, while it is a nice gesture and is generally done, and one of the most moving concession speeches was that given by Al Gore in 2000 after he fought mightily for the votes in Florida. Those also are not official. What it does, it allows the process to go forward without legal challenge. So the first thing we would see is these legal challenges in each of the states. So at the beginning of the program, Tamar said that both parties are lining up lawyers in each of the states to file lawsuits in each of the states to contest the votes. But they can't do that until the Secretary of State of the particular state makes some announcement, as Ms. Harris did in Florida in 2000. And then the Al Gore campaign, Gore-Lieberman campaign, contested the votes. And that was only because the difference between Al Gore and George Bush in 2000 was less than 0.5% of the votes. So 0.5%. And each state has their own statute. So before we get to the House of Representatives, we first will have these challenges. I'm not prepared to say what would be if we get to January 20 at noon and we do not have a known winner. Because we don't know who's going to be in the House of Representatives. So it is true that the House of Representatives, even with the Electoral College, the House of Representatives ends up officially declaring who the president is. We've just never seen it before. We saw it in 2000, but we've never seen it because usually the transition is pretty smooth.
All right, and the first segment of the show, you were also talking about something, but we got cut off because of the break. Do you want to continue there?
Right, sure. So that's just, and what I was doing was just getting at how the election is done, and I basically finished it up with Antonio's question, which is that when the electors choose, there's a college, an electoral college. It's a real thing, and these individuals who've been chosen by the states, they meet. And then they officially cast the votes for the candidate that their state has chosen. And then that name goes to the House of Representatives. And then before January 20, usually the end of December, that's when the House of Representatives then chooses that person. And that's the way the Constitutional Convention set it up in 1787. When there was some compromise made because there was this great fear of a monarch who would be too strong. And so how that person was elected became part of a great debate in the Constitutional Convention in 1787. And this is the result. And it's been changed a couple of times because things changed once there was a party system. And I won't get into that those are details that are beyond our scope. But that has been changed to what we do today in the United States. And again, that's only for president. All other offices are chosen by popular vote, but within the state. And so to that end, I do want to make something abundantly clear, which I think many people don't realize simply because it's different in every country. The United States does not have a national vote. There is no national vote for president. It's by each state. And that's why it's a little bit complex. So we have 50 separate places voting for president of the United States.
So yeah, go ahead.
So what would happen? That's why it's really difficult to predict from a legal perspective what would be if there's an official winner, if Joe Biden is declared, through the processes I've mentioned, the winner of the presidential election through the Electoral College. And for whatever reason, Donald Trump would not leave the White House. In simple terms, he'd simply be trespassing. He'd be violating the law. And he would no longer have authority. For instance, he could not call on the Secret Service to protect him, and that wouldn't happen. Interestingly, a former U.S. attorney named Barbara McQuaid wrote an article way back in February of this year, February 22nd, on this very question. It's in the Atlantic magazine for anybody who'd like to look for it. She outlines what would happen. Personally, I realize, despite all the bombast that we've become used to in these months, I don't see that happen. I think if there is a set winner after all the legal challenges are done, and remember, there were legal challenges, despite what Hillary says, even though she conceded, she did challenge in some of the states. She brought challenges to some of the elections in the states. So it's not unheard of, and it's not unusual, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's certainly, if the voting is close, then a candidate has the right to challenge the ballots in any particular state.
You were telling me during the break that there was a governor who didn't accept the results of an election. Can you quickly tell us about that? Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
So Ms. McQuaid relates some of this in her article. So in 1874, a Texas governor locked himself in the basement of the state capitol after losing his re-election bid. And when Republican Governor Edmund Davis lost the 1873 election by a 2-to-1 ratio, he claimed that the election had been tainted. Now, to his advantage, he had 3 Supreme Court judges of Texas who were all Republicans, so they also found that the election was tainted. But at the end of the day, when the winner, the Democratic challenger, Richard Cook, or Koch, I'm not sure how he pronounced it, arrived at the state capitol with a sheriff's posse, he was sworn in based on popular demand. And then the next day, Davis, he was the one who lost the election, requested federal troops from President Grant, and President Grant refused. And so Davis finally stepped down 3 days later. And in 1946, Georgia had a similar thing. And as I think Antonio pointed out, President Roosevelt did run for a third. In fact, he won a 4th term. I think sometimes we tend to forget when he passed away, he was just at the beginning of his 4th term. So in 1951, I think then the 22nd Amendment was passed, limiting presidential terms to 2 terms, which is the precedent started by George Washington.
Right.
And then and FDR broke with that. But again, he was popular at the time, and but I think it's instructive too. That if one looks at history and some of the presidential elections, the presidential campaigns that have gone on in the United States, including when FDR won his first one, he was not very popular, and there was a lot of bombast, and there's a lot of rhetoric. And presidential politics is not for the faint of heart. The fact that we're seeing it more has more to do with electronic media, in my opinion, than the fact of people's attitudes or language changing. It's a tough business, and it's there's a lot of money at stake, and there's a lot of power at stake. Mm-hmm. And whenever you have those combinations, you have people doing and saying all kinds of things.
Right. All right, hold it right there. We're going to take another break, and when we get back, I'm going to be asking about the Jews. How safe will it be for Jews? A lot of people will be pointing fingers. The Jews vote Democrat. Religious Jews don't. They vote more Republican. But we'll be taking a look. We'll be right back.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we're back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. We're speaking with David Jaffa. He is talking to us about what would happen if, after the U.S. elections, no side conceded because both accused the other side of cheating. And I am afraid for what could happen, because we don't have to just look at the law side. We discussed that in the last two segments, but let's look at the streets. Because the streets is a completely different universe. And you've got people who are angry on both sides and will be angrier once they find out that the other candidate may have won. If it is the Democrats that won and they're going to be taking over, there may be people on the quote-unquote patriot side who are going to bring up arms and say, you're not going to tell us what to do. And we're not going to accept all these mermaid, gay, liberal, I don't know what it is. And then you may have on the other side the people say, Trump won? No way, we don't accept it. And they're going to burn the cities down. And I know I've been castigated by at least one listener who wrote into me saying I'm causing fear and I'm an alarmist. But I think, after being the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, when no one listened to Jabotinsky, not that I'm a Jabotinsky, I'm not, but no one listened to these warning signs, and we saw what happened. So I'm always urging the Jewish people to make Aliyah. America's a wonderful place. We love America. Go back there in the summers, go shopping, visit the rest of your friends and family that may have remained there, etc. But it's time to come home. And I see violence happening, whoever wins, I see violence happening. So on that note, David, what would happen? You were talking about comparing what happened on the streets of Germany with Kristallnacht to what could be a possible scenario after the U.S. elections. Take us where you want to take us.
Well, I think it's important for people to be thoughtful about what's going on. And Kristallnacht I used as an example because it was perpetrated more only by thugs and by violent individuals who are not necessarily associated with the government or the police in German cities. In my mother's town of Bingen, which is a small wine town, so the town was basically destroyed. Certainly the temple that was there was destroyed, and the next day, while the police didn't do anything to these renegade, violent individuals, so the Jews of the town did receive a tax bill to clean up the city from the government. And
so
over time,
I want to repeat that because the Jews were attacked, their businesses were destroyed, and then to clean up all the broken glass and the destruction, the Jews were forced to pay for it. The victim was forced to pay for what the violent people did. Go ahead.
Correct, but it's important to understand in any situation there is not a direct relationship. We're talking about your scenario was that the election will go awry and then there'll be violence, and we've seen violence already. And when I said at the beginning of this piece that people have to be thoughtful, we have to look and see what the violence is about. And no, I don't think that people are being violent about the actual cause. In other words, in America today, you have at least a statement that is because of the so-called systemic racism, and that has caused violence. We can argue day and night about systemic racism, but the violence is caused by people who want to create chaos and want to create a problem. And so that violence occurs outside of the context of the alleged problem. And so for Jews in the United States, which is where we broke, people have to be very thoughtful about what is going to happen to them and to their lives. We have individuals who've been elected to office, and please keep in mind, Adolf Hitler was popularly elected in 1933 through law. Okay, he was not a dictator. He was a dictator, but he did not take over extra legally. He became the Reich Marshal, the Reich leader, legally. And it was after that, then he imposed many of the laws through his party in the Reichstag. And that's how that happened. And that's how it happens in all places where you have dictators. And people need to be aware of what is happening in their lives, and they need to listen carefully to things. Now, one of the first things that Hitler did, and what any dictator does, is take away the right to bear arms. The Second Amendment in the United States has been sacrosanct. And as much as guns may be anathema to some people, the fact is the reason the Second Amendment was made part of the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution was because the founders and those individuals knew what would happen if a government were left unchecked and the citizenry were not allowed to protect themselves. And for Jews especially, this was very important. Despite the great uprising in Warsaw during the war, after the Warsaw Ghetto, it would have been much easier if each individual had their own weapon, obviously. Because of that, leaders know to take weapons away from the citizenry. So when people start talking about that, about repealing the Second Amendment, about taking guns away from citizens, that is coded language for other things.
Like what?
And, well, for a dictatorship. Because if you also limiting the press, and I know that people have accused Mr. Trump of wanting to limit the press, but I think if you look carefully at what he has said and done, he's not talking about limiting their rights or the power of the press, the First Amendment, which he could not do even if he wanted to, not as things are now. But it's because once you limit the ability of people to communicate, you also have a path towards dictatorship. And we see it today. People have lost their jobs for speaking out, for speaking their minds. Now, in the private setting in the United States, a person doesn't have the right to say whatever they want, unless apparently you are a professional athlete, then you can. But that's that's the point. And if I say what you want me to say, I can say it. But if I say what you don't want me to say and you put enough pressure on me, I can lose my job. Those are the beginnings. Those are the underpinnings of a change of thought. If you look very carefully at the very stern and harsh language that the founders used against each other, albeit respectfully, that was free speech. But they didn't hold back. And no one was castigated for it. One of the most famous, of course, is Patrick Henry's Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death. Mm-hmm. If you look at that, I mean, he was not bashful at all about anything he said, but he said it respectfully. He knew how to speak. He knew how to write. And he wasn't castigated for it. If a person would speak like that today and take a position that's against the majority, they would be castigated. And those are the kinds of things you have to look out for. Those are the things that Jews in the United States need to be worried about and need to be thoughtful about.
Right. And, you know, in the last 2 minutes that we have, I want to remind everybody again that there's the government violence that could take place that we've seen in history. And then there's on the streets violence. And if the police department is defunded and there's nobody to call to protect you, or if the police, just because perhaps their mayor tells them not to react. We saw this happen, by the way, in Crown Heights when there was a demonstration, protests and rioting there for 2 days before the police went in. And their excuse was, well, we want the place to calm down a bit before we send the police in. And we had, I think his name was Yankee Rosenblum or something like that was killed over there. He was an Australian citizen, a Jewish boy. And this could really be a terribly dangerous thing. Very quickly, do you believe that a civil war could break out in the United States if there's no peaceful transition of government?
Not yet. I don't think so. I think Americans overall are broader than that and more thoughtful than that. I think the news we get is also channeled and is also done. Keep in mind, we have a whole different news thing today, which is if someone writes a headline, they want me to click on it because they get money. That's how they get their money. It's a little bit different than the old yellow journalism. And so, again, people need to be thoughtful about which news stories they read, because as soon as you click on one, if you're getting your news electronically, as soon as you click on a story, you're giving somebody money. Keep that in mind. So broaden your horizons. Don't listen to the news. Go to C-SPAN if you want to hear what somebody said without someone's interpretation of it.
And hopefully people will be able to continue to say what they want, because, as you said, I think it was somebody who said all lives matter, not just Black Lives Matter, and they were let go from their job. There was professors, I think, that were let go from their job. In college campuses where you're supposed to have the free exchange of ideas and critical thinking and debate, where it's the worst place sometimes to be able to express your opinions and even your faith. All right, I want to thank you, I want to thank you, David Jaffa, for being with us. And again, you can go to his website where his law firm is, ljjlaw.com. Thank you for being with us in the show, explaining to us what could happen, and letting us take a closer look at the election process in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you all for listening in as well. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to write me, Tamar, Tamar, at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.